Hello and welcome to revision tips for SIPS Level 5, Advanced Diploma in Procurement and Supply. And this is Module 7, Achieving Competitive Advantage Throughout the Supply Chain. We're looking at Learning Outcome 1, which is to understand the dynamics of the supply chain. So in this section, we're going to look at comparing supply chains, networks and supply chain management, added value that effective supply chain management can deliver, the relationship between organisational infrastructure, process management in supply chain, and the approaches to improving the supply chain. So a supply chain is the entire process of making and selling commercial goods, consisting of links which include every stage from supply of materials and manufacture of the goods through to the distribution and sale. A supply chain network shows the links between organisations and how information and material flow between these links. A network describes a more complex structure than a chain, where organisations can be cross-linked and there are two-way exchanges between them. Supply chain management is the active management of supply chain activities to maximise customer value and achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. It represents a conscious effort by the supply chain firm to develop and run supply chains in the most effective and efficient way possible. So you can just see on the screen the difference between a chain and a network, where you've got lots of different things in the upstream and downstream. I want to make you aware of something called the Bullwhip Effect, which is a supply chain phenomenon that describes how small fluctuations in demand at the retail level can progressively cause larger fluctuations in demand at the wholesale level, the distributor, the manufacturer, whoever. And the effect of this name is there because of the physics involved in cracking a whip. When the person holding the whip snaps their wrist, the relatively small movement causes the whip to pattern as a wave to increase and amplify down the supply chain. So the bullwhip effect often occurs when retailers become highly reactive to demand and in turn amplify expectations around it, which cause a domino effect along the supply chain. Suppose, for example, a retailer typically keeps 100 six-packs of canned drinks based in stock. If it normally sells 20 packs a day, it would order that replacement amount from the distributor. But one day they sell 70 packs and assumes customers will start buying more products and responded by ordering 100 six-packs to meet the higher demand. The distributor then may respond by ordering double or 200 six-packs. Manufacturer wants to ensure they don't run out, so they produce 250, and the increased demand is amplified up the supply chain. The complexity of a traditional supply chain is defined by the number of suppliers or cost centres where something takes place or holds inventory. Usually each of these is characterised by perceived demand for products, a production value-adding process, information on current performance, or disturbances like breakdowns and delays, decision points where the information is brought together, transmission lag for all activities, and decision rule based on all company procedures, so changing stock levels, placing new orders, production requirements, and so on. In the open loop supply chain, which is the traditional supply chain, products do not return to the original producer, unlike in the closed loop or reverse supply chain. Here the products are either recovered by either party willing or able to reuse the materials or products, or they're disposed in landfill. But in the closed loop supply chain, materials are returned back and reused by the originator. That's either the supplier or the manufacturer. They bring products back into and remanufacture or refurbish them before reselling to a second market. The steps in an open loop supply chain start with gathering raw materials. That could be a lumberjack cutting down trees to make paper. The second then is to acquire materials. So the manufacturing company then acquires those materials. And that's sometimes quite straightforward. Other times They have to be made into something like paper from trees. Manufacturing comes third after the materials have been acquired. The company now needs to assemble them into a product. And fourth, distributing. The next step is to move the products to the customer. Often the manufacturer customers are not the end customer, but some middleman. So, it could be selling to a retail outlet and then finally selling to the end user. The customer, in this case of the retail store, can sell the product to that end user, and then this occurs when you finally purchase the final product. But in closed loop supply chains, it works a little bit differently because it involves the movement of used or unsold products from the customer to the upstream supply chain for possible recycling and reuse. Most logistics service providers offer something called reverse logistics as one of their core competencies. Reverse logistics is a set of activities that include collection, inspection, sorting, disassembly, reworking, and recycling, as well as disposal of used products or product returns. Once an item has been manufactured and distributed, a closed loop manufacturer will attempt to encourage the item return when it's no longer being used by offering some kind of take back program or an incentive. They will either return it to its previous condition ready for resale, or they'll use the parts that can be used for further products. Now, activities that occur within the boundaries of a single organisation include things like procurement, distribution, inventory management. But the purpose of logistics is to deliver the goods to the end customer. So supply chain management manages the network of organisations that are bundled together, and they coordinate the activities in order to deliver the product to the market. It has a wide view on marketing, new product development, innovation, and customer experiences, coordinating those activities of the network of organisations that work together in order to deliver the product to the market. It has the goal of maximising economic value and aims to improve the performance of an organisation's supply chain by enhancing its responsiveness to the market and by reducing costs. So here are 4 supply chain strategies. Firstly, rationalisation, which is to minimise cost in the supply chain through the use of basic processes like sourcing, negotiation, contracting, product rationalisation, supplier consolidation, tier skipping, and value engineering. You've then got synchronisation. This is adopting techniques that match supply with demand. So it might look at things like lean distribution techniques or collaborative inventory management. Third is customization, targeting customers' bespoke needs through value analysis and new product development. And innovation is to seek rapid new product development through early supplier engagement, gain share, risk management, and forward branding. So supply chain management involves aligning flows as money, materials, and information are passed between the customer and supplier. Supply chain management keeps them flowing up and down a supply chain. So supply chain management connects those activities of logistics, procurement, and operations to ensure that it focuses on the goals and the benefits overall performance. Supply chain management increases profitability by aligning the processes used to plan, source, make, and deliver, and return a company's products and services. Simulation tools can predict how a supply chain can behave and how small changes can cause major disruptions in the flow of materials. So supply chain managers are responsible for using people, processes, and technology to meet the demand of the customer. The performance of the supply chain is then measured in terms of finance, customers, people, and processes. So there again, you can see your supply chain strategies. And among many of these issues, the supply chain effectiveness is challenging, which is complex in a mass customization. And you've got things like product line profilation and shorter product life cycles and pressure for faster innovation, or a stress from quicker technology cycles, tougher non-negotiable service levels, extended global supply chains, and abundant channels and markets that cause business cycle variability. With 40 to 70% of costs embedded in a typical supply chain, it's critical that companies manage their supply chains optimally to achieve the highest returns now and in the future as the business environment changes. This can be achieved through product rationalization and supplier concentration, matching supply and demand, targeting customers with their bespoke needs, and improving product development cycle times. So supply chain management could span all links in the supply chain, from suppliers to logistics providers, to distributors, to facilitations, warehouses, customers. The entire network needs to be aligned to achieve the same goals of serving the end customer. Now, modern supply chains are very complex. They're multi-tiered networks that consist of continually evolving relationships involving many thousands of individual suppliers across the world. Globalisation and shift patterns of trade can quickly create new risk hotspots. All of this makes any kind of commitment to improving standards at scale more challenging. Tiering suppliers is a form of supply-based management in which suppliers are organised such that only first-tier suppliers deal directly with the buying organisation. The second tiers will participate in the same supply chain, but will first-tier suppliers who assemble or integrate before buying organisation has them. The practice originated in the automotive industry and allowed car assemblies to reduce their first-tier supply base to below 1,000 suppliers. The practice allows the development of differentiated supply chain relationships with smaller community suppliers. Now, supply chains and supply networks both describe the flow and movement of materials and information by linking organisations together to serve the end customer. So the network describes a more complex structure where organisations can be cross-linked and there is a two-way exchange between them. The chain describes a much simpler sequence of set of links. So a supply chain network shows the links between the organisations and how the materials and information flows between them. So the more detailed supply chain network, the more complex and the web of the network becomes. Now, while many analytical and numerical modes have been produced to handle operational and design issues, formal models of strategic planning are scarce. Now, the Supply Chain Operational Reference, or the SCORS model, was developed by the Supply Chain Council. It's a strategic planning tool that allows senior managers to simply simplify the complexity of their supply chain. It's firmly rooted in industrial practice and has the potential to become an industry standard that enables the next generation supply chain management. So the SCOR model is designed to help maintain these processes and to evaluate them for the effectiveness and efficiency. Supply chain management is complex, but the SCOR model is intended to help standardize the process and create a measurable way to track results. It's meant to work across industries and using common definitions that can apply to any supply chain process. Using the SCOR model, businesses can judge how advanced or mature a supply chain process is and how well it aligns to the business goals. SCOR methodology assumes that all supply chain processes can be divided and subdivided into one of 5 generic subtypes. You've got the plan, source, make, deliver, return. Complex supply chains are made up of a multiple combination of these basic processes. So what are the advantages and disadvantages? So as well as what you can see on the screen, the SCOR model provides benefits in using standardized processes and metrics that can be easily communicated. It allows the creation of supply chain models that have considerable network scope, but limited operational detail. The model is also rich in terms of its own units of input and outputs. Despite the benefits, there's a range of limitations that the score-based model has. One of the main difficulties is that the score configuration is complex, so it's easy to miss something out and therefore produce an invalid model. The user may be thinking that they've simulated the operation of the desired strategy through the configuration options, when actually detail of the model is very limited. Now, high-performing supply chains are essential, especially in a global economy, so that you can deliver goods and services to customers in accordance with the demand expectations. And organisations also depend on their supply chain processes to manage customer expectations and stay one step ahead of the competitor. Through the realisation of added value, competitive priorities can be broken down into a number of dimensions, each of which adds value and improves the competitive advantage of the organisation. These dimensions are often viewed as they are distinct and independent from one another, but they must form part of an integrated supply chain strategy. Effective supply chain management will require continuous improvement across all dimensions, and the added value created by competitive priorities must be considered when selecting the level of interaction with each supplier or the tier in the supply chain. Otherwise, competitive advantage will be diminished. Now, supply chain innovation is emerging as a critical area for many organisations in delivering added value. So organisations need to work in close collaboration with supply chain members to improve overall product profitability. They do this by effectively bringing together quality, cost and delivery dimensions in the most efficient and coordinated manner. But innovation may be achieved in a number of ways: through logistics, by identifying opportunities to get the products to market in the shortest amount of time, through improving the quality of the products, and through elements and boundaries, by introducing technology to automate and modify processes or products. Effective innovation is affected by how technology is used, the adoption of the integrated supply chain approach, legal, financial, environmental, and market considerations. The innovation framework can be used to identify and then pursue the innovation that's going to offer greatest benefit. And added value can be created at several supply chain tiers and at various stages in the product development lifecycle. There is a range of design functions that can increase competitive advantage, including the design for manufacture, assembly, product serviceability, Six Sigma, and the environment. So if we have a look at the quality definitions first, to survive and thrive, managing quality effectively can enhance your organisation's brand and reputation and protect it against risk, increase its efficiency, boost its profits, and position it to keep it growing, all while making staff and customers happier. Quality is not just a box to be ticked or something you pay lip service to. Failures resulting from poor governance, ineffective assurance, and resistance to change can and do have dire consequences for businesses, as well as individuals and society as a whole. Quality isn't just an issue for commercial enterprises. Every organisation has stakeholders of one kind or another whose needs must meet, which is what effective quality management is ultimately all about. It's about striving to meet the needs of your stakeholders. So the cost of quality is defined as a methodology that allows an organisation to determine the extent to which its resources are used for activities that prevent poor quality, that appraise the quality of an organisation's products or services, and that result from internal or external failures. Having such information allows an organisation to determine the potential saving to be gained by implementing process improvements. Cost of quality is a monetary figure used by project management personnel in the decision-making process. It's often misunderstood because cost of quality does not refer to the cost of providing a quality product or service. It refers to the cumulative costs required to bring poor quality service or products up to the standard defined by project management. In essence, it's the cost of failing to provide a product or a service of an acceptable initial quality, which can result in poor communication, increased customer expectations, or a decreased trust in the organisation. So the supply chain management framework is a formal coordination and integration of business processes involving all partner organisations in the supply chain to measure, analyse and continually improve products, services and processes in order to create value and achieve satisfaction of intermediate and final customers in the marketplace. Satisfying customers can take place when the product or service is valued and they're coupled at every node in the supply chain. So linking quality in these nodes involves not only a commitment to quality intra-organisationally, but quality initiatives that extend beyond the firm to upstream and downstream channel partners. Now, price consists of cost and value, and it's therefore procurement's responsibility to reduce cost and increase value within the supply chain through a range of different cost management strategies. This can be achieved by establishing a range of supply chain strategies with multiple suppliers. You can create a competitive market by motivating suppliers to compete against each other and to develop alternatives that maintain a competitive advantage. Organisations can now invest in information technology packages that integrate internal organisations and link directly with the same package acquired by suppliers. This increases speed and quality of information shared across the supply chain. One example would be introducing a SAP system. SAP makes enterprise software to manage business operations. On the supply side, the optimization of stock retention and storage can reduce the associated costs of holding stock and the associated levels of inventory. By developing a just-in-time methodology, organizations can reduce stock management cost along with the direct cost of inventory itself and the indirect costs associated with overheads. The quicker we get products to market, the less time the inventory spends within the supply chain and the greater the satisfaction of customer or consumer. With the inventory speeding and less time is spent in the supply chain, this will lower the costs associated with it, and the subsequent increase in customer satisfaction will secure and develop sales. Demand management ensures that the right information is collected from the marketplace in terms of customer demand, reducing volatility in the supply chain and subsequently reducing the inventory required to meet that demand. But lead time refers to the internal and external lead time associated with ordering a product and receiving it. So in this example, we can see the lead time of raw materials to component manufacture to the final assembly. Once received by the buying organisation, we can see the downstream lead time related to distribution of the final customer. At each stage of storage, manufacture or distribution, we can see variations in time. From each supply chain perspective, it's important to reduce or eradicate these variations prior to establishing whether it's possible to reduce the lead time. But you should note that if the lead time is reduced too much, it could cause problems with quality and suppliers take shortcuts to deliver the new time. So it's a balance between being efficient and flexible. And the difference between an efficient supply chain and a flexible one comes down to the ability to meet uncertain demand. An efficient supply chain can link its suppliers, manufacturers and retailers to manage orders and processing and meet a stable, predictable demand at a lower cost. This is done independently and without the ability to address shifts in demand and agility. But conversely, a flexible supply chain works collaboratively among stakeholders to exchange information in a management feedback loop. And that's in order to produce enough of the product to satisfy uncertain demand. Having real-time visibility empowers a company to manage in real time, and that means greater control. Greater operational control allows for quicker detection of expectations and disaster, tracking of constraints and commitments, and responsiveness. When businesses are not consistent with lead times or anything else, a company that has the ability to see inside its supply chain, including the work in progress, can increase its lead times to respond to unexpected shifts and success. Innovation can greatly impact supply chain performance. Here are 5 aspects of the supply chain that can be innovated to meet the customer's needs and save the cost. Design for manufacture is designing the product to make it easy to produce, therefore reducing the cost of manufacture. Designing for assembly is designing a product to minimize the number of components, easing the assembly process. Often this results in building subsystems that are easier to put together. Designing for product serviceability is so the product has ease of assembly, disassembly, and component reuse. The products are often easier to repair compared to products that are assembled with bigger components, making the individual parts more difficult to access. Design for quality is designing the product to eliminate quality failures, so improve your consistency and reduce your cost. Developing a TQM, total quality management, helps you to consistently increase quality standards. And then designing for environment. This is when you design the product to reduce its environmental impact throughout its life cycle. This might be accomplished through less packaging, a more efficient supply chain, or by recycling waste along the way. We have an obligation as well to reduce risk and vulnerability. Organisations need to minimise the risk and improve resilience along their supply chains. This helps them to minimise disruption and therefore minimise the financial and reputational implications of any disruption. Each supply chain can be divided into 3 broad categories, and each can affect price, inventories, lead time, and quality. So you've got demand side resulting from disruptions emerging from downstream the supply chain, like unpredictable demand of retailers and unplanned stockouts from your distributors. Then supply side is residing in purchasing supplier activities, supplier relationships, likely an incident associated with supplier failures. Can also result from the inability of an organisation to meet customer demand, or where there are threats of customer life and safety. And the third category is catastrophic risk, disruption at any level of the supply chain that has a severe impact. Each type of impact category has prices, inventories, delivery, lead times, and quality. And segmentation can contribute to understanding the supply chains within an organisation, but you'd need to undertake a risk assessment for each critical product or service. So step 1 is to identify where the risks arise. Step 2 is to quantify that risk by evaluating the likelihood of the impact as well as the impact. Step 3 is to respond by putting in place a mitigation action. Tolerate, treat, terminate, transfer. And the final step is to respond, to mitigate the response time, reduce and introduce test business continuity plans. Value is the importance, worth, or usefulness of something, and added value is the amount by which the value of a product is increased at each stage of its production, exclusive of any initial costs. Or it can be defined as the addition to features to a basic line or model for which the buyer is prepared to pay extra. So imagine a customer buying a cake. The value is acquiring the cake. The ingredients have been bought, mixed, and baked, which has added value at each stage of the production. But what if the customer expects more? What if the customer wants value add? Some customers may say the cake is not enough to satisfy them unless it's decorated. So the added value is cherry on the top. Now, according to the resource-based view proponents, it's much more feasible to explore external opportunities using your existing resources in a new way rather than trying to acquire new skills for each different opportunity. So this resource-based view model is where resources are given a major role in helping companies to achieve organisational performance. But there are two types of resources: tangible on the left, intangible on the right. The tangible are physical things: land, building machines, equipment, capital. All these assets are tangible. They can easily be bought in the market, so they confer little advantage to companies in the long run because rivals can soon acquire identical assets. But it's the intangible ones, which are everything else that has no physical presence. They can be owned by the company, like a brand reputation, a trademark, intellectual property. These are all intangible assets. And unlike the physical resources, brand reputation is built over a long time. It's not something that companies can buy from the market. Whereas intangible resources usually stay within a company and they're the source of a sustainable competitive advantage. So the VRIO framework was identified by an author called Barney. It examines if resources are valuable, rare, costly to imitate, and non-substitutable. The resources and capabilities that answer yes to all these questions are sustained competitive advantages. So value is something that's valuable to your organisation that helps you to increase the value offering to your customers. That can be done by increasing differentiation, decreasing the cost of production, but the resource cannot meet this condition, lead to a competitive disadvantage. The rarity are resources that can only be acquired by one or a few companies that are considered rare. This is often reflected as monopolies or oligopolies. With more than a few companies having the same resource or capability, it results in competitive parity. And then we've got inimitability. If the company has something of valuable that's rare, it can also be easy and less, at least temporarily, competitive advantage because the resource is costly to imitate or to substitute for a rival. But if a company wants to achieve sustained competitive advantage, they need something inimitable. So your organization needs to have all of these things so that it can say, they've got some form of sustained competitive advantage. And then we look at the culture. So organizations have different cultures. So a power culture is one that's got centralized control. It focuses on key decision makers. And in a large organization, this is usually the top management who are results orientated with an emphasis on winning. A role culture is more formalized culture, with jobs having clear rules and procedures. Individuals know their position within the hierarchy. This may be appropriate for a medium to large business in a stable environment. However, it may lead to silo mentality, where individuals and departments do not communicate or share information. A task culture is a creative environment where there is a focus on specific tasks and projects. Individuals are brought in to work on tasks as when they're required, share ideas across functions, and it occurs in organisations such as design and advertising agencies. In a person culture, individuals have considerable freedom to act independently, and it is a friendly environment to work in. It may occur in organisations such as legal or medical practices, where individuals have high levels of specialist technical expertise. But whatever structure is selected, an organisation must make sure that it supports its strategy and that it can have a competitive advantage. There are a number of examples of organisational models. Structures follow strategy. Internal design elements like communication, decision-making authority, and autonomy are considered critical to the design of an organisation. All design elements must be aligned around the chosen structure. And organisations need to restructure for every market shift that occurs, including when new technology is introduced. The coordination and consolidation of alignment will enable the organisation to effectively pursue the corporate positioning strategy. 3 steps to design an organisational structure to match a strategy in a basic organisational design are to select the design, modify if needed, and supplement it with coordinating mechanisms and communication arrangements. And there are 3 basic ways to structure an organisation: the functional structure, cross-functional, and matrix. And what you can see on the screen is a functional structure framework. So employees are centralised into department-based skills of what they do. Common functions are procurement, finance, sales, marketing, and human resources. Each department acts in its own entire entity and is focused on activities rather than the overall strategy. The type of functions are stable and easy to maintain. The coordination and specialization of the tasks make producing large volumes and functions and standardized products efficient and usually low cost, as they can be sold and distributed quickly. But the challenge is that cross-functional decision making can take time due to the reduced ability to respond to market changes, be flexible, or introduce innovation. This one's an organisational structure. So what you'll see here is some sort of division, primarily decentralised as a function and a structure, and employees are organised around their location. So you've got Division A and Division B, each have their own marketing, operations and procurement functions. So structure empowers business units with autonomy to control their supply and process and technology decisions, but there's an inability for individual units to leverage the full operational capacity of the organisation, and there's little information sharing and coordination between those functions and divisions. And the final one is the matrix structure. Employees are grouped together by function, of which they're a member of a production team. Combines functional and multi-divisional structures, so it's an alternative to a decentralised or centralised structure. So functional staff report to the head of their profession or discipline and then work alongside other disciplines to report to another manager. The challenges here is about accountability and confusion regarding the structure. Now, a system is a network of interdependent elements that work together to accomplish the system aim or its intent. Thinking of organisations as systems provides us with a variety of important viewpoints. For example, organisations are exposed to their environment just as any type of other system. In order for systems to work effectively in such a challenging environment, systems must be capable of adaptation and continuous improvement. Failure to monitor and make adjustments to the environment can cause a state called entropy, where misalignment occurs through incorrect assertions and decisions. This leads to irrelevance and threatens survival. The organisation as a total system is made up of subsystems, which typically include its functions. These may include marketing, finance, production, operations, HR. Such subsystems work independently and for the common good for the total system. This cannot work effectively if isolated or managed independently from the others. A change in one subsystem usually affects another, and in turn the total system. So subsystems therefore work towards synergy in order to accomplish organisational goals that could have not been accomplished in one subsystem alone. Now, process management is the sourcing process in procurement and managing the stages of the process. Strategic sourcing is an approach to supply chain management that formalises the way information is gathered and used so that an organisation can leverage its consolidated purchasing power to find the best possible values in the marketplace. But it requires analysis of what an organisation buys, from whom, at what price, and at what volume. So strategic sourcing differs from conventional purchasing because it places the emphasis on the entire life cycle of the product, not just the initial purchase price. The emphasis is on the role of supplier relationship management and development. So it's described as a method of managing the processes in procurement for an organisation in which its procedures, methods and sources are consistently re-evaluated to optimise value to the organisation. Strategic sourcing, which is considered a key aspect of supply chain management, involves elements like examination of purchasing budgets, the landscape of supply markets, negotiation, and suppliers with periodic assessments and supply transactions. So sourcing is a part of the procurement and supply cycle. The sourcing or tendering process is used to select the best product or service from a certain category of expenditure. So the first step is to understand what the needs are from the customer, the person who requires the product or service. As a buyer, you challenge and translate these needs into specifications that suppliers can understand. Once you've got a clear picture of the business requirements, your next step is to formally invite suppliers to quote for your business. At the negotiation stage, you analyse the offers and select the most promising supplier to negotiate with. And then you prepare your negotiation. And then once the contract is awarded, post-contract award activities would include supplier relationship management. So a process map is a planning and management tool that visually describes the flow of work. Using work process maps software, these maps show a series of events that produce an end result. A process map is also called a flow chart, a process flow chart, or a process chart. There's loads of different names for it, including a workflow diagram, a business flow diagram, process model. You can call it whatever you like, but it shows who and what is involved in a process and can be used by any business and can reveal areas where processes can be improved. The purpose of process mapping for an organisation and business to improve efficiency. So those process maps involve insight into a process and they help the team to brainstorm ideas for process improvements or increased communication, or to provide process documentation. And the mapping will identify bottlenecks, repetition and delays. They help to define process boundaries, ownership, responsibilities and effectiveness as a measure of process metrics. Now, Porter's value chain model shows the processes and activities to add value to its products or services, whereas value chain analysis is a process tool to identify the primary and support activities that contribute and add value to the final product or service, or activities that need to reduce the cost or increase differentiation. The purpose of VCA is to identify the most valuable activities, the source of cost or differentiation advantage, and which one needs to be improved to provide competitive advantage. So the value chain is looking at the product into primary and support activities, both at the organisational level and along the supply chain. You can calculate total target costs and compare the costs for each function with customer benefits and improve the functions and activities until value exceeds the cost. So the primary activities at the bottom, you've got the inbound logistics, receiving, storing materials, so they can be used in manufacturing as necessary. Then operations, transforming the raw materials into finished goods. Outbound logistics is associated with warehousing and distribution of the finished goods. Marketing and sales choose and implement a marketing strategy to communicate the marketing message to the target customer. And then after sales service support is provided to the customer after the sale has happened. And although the primary activities directly add value to the product or service, the value chain recognises that it's not necessarily more important than the support activities. So these support activities will include the firm's infrastructure, a company's organisational structure, its departments, its committees, its organisational culture, as well as its human resources management, which include a wide range of activities related to employee recruitment and selection. The technological development is the use of technology to increase the effectiveness of primary activities in terms of value creation. And then procurement, purchasing practices of raw materials, tools and equipment. So the support activities and capabilities like systems and research are usually an important source of differentiation and advantage. So value add can be created in two ways: differentiation and cost advantage. Differentiation is focusing on activities associated with their competitive advantage. Investing in these activities will allow you to increase the quality of your products and services and sell them for higher prices. So, an organisation that competes through differentiation will try to perform its activities better than its competitors. The alternative is to have the cost advantage, reducing the costs and activities where possible, and using the cost benefit to reduce the price of final products or services. And when an organisation competes through cost advantage, it will try to perform internal activities at lower cost than its competitors. The spectrum of relationships in supply chains is a continuum with competitive relationships at one end and collaborative relationships at the other. And the approaches vary in between. So the different types from left to right is adversarial, which is the most competitive, traditionally not productive, and organisations see each other as opponents, each striving to obtain competitive advantage at the other's expense. Little trust, communication and cooperation is there, and there's likely to be conflict. And it may be appropriate where profit is the key driver and there is a significant number of suppliers. Arm's length is very similar to the adversarial, but implies less direct contact between the buyer and supplier. A distant relationship resulting in infrequent interaction. Transactional, very similar to arm's length, perhaps more frequent requirement on the part of the organisation, but is still referring to low value and risk suppliers. So your objective is to source the goods or services at the lowest possible cost, but that depends on the market conditions because there may be an opportunity for both the buyer and supplier to enter into repeat exchanges as long as the basic performance and conditions are satisfied and price is competitive. Then you've got your closer tactical. This is needed for collaborative relationships where it's not completely justified, but you ensure that the supplier is competent and may even require the supplier to act as a prime for several smaller suppliers. So in these circumstances, you may have selected a supplier to act as your service aggregator, which will form part of the broader supply chain management strategy, which is seeking to reduce overhead costs by reducing the number of suppliers. Single sourcing is where you look to gain a commitment and preferential treatment through exclusivity. So high level of trust between the organisation and supplier than the closer tactical ones. But exclusivity is often built into a contract framework. Outsourcing is appropriate when you realise that a supplier is able to do something better and cheaper than you can. So relationship is established under a high degree of trust, and owing to the longer term nature of the decision, organisations process and proceed very carefully with full investigation of the existing arrangements and proposed new arrangements. So examples would be IT service desks and facilities management. Strategic alliance is an appropriate in high-level risk markets where there's a number of mutual benefits to both the buying organisation and the selling organisation. Collaboration is key and relationship is built on a high level of trust and mutual commitment. So examples here would be automotive alliances, enabling the sharing of suppliers and organisational resources like designs and tools. Your partnership is similar to a strategic alliance, but commitment level from both parties is deeper. The openness and transparency is key to the operating principles and the objectives are agreed and shared. The relationship is of equal parties. Typically, each party is committed to continuous improvement and elimination of waste, and benefits are shared equally and work both together to find opportunities that will benefit both organisations. And then co-density is the most collaborative type. The buying organisation and supplier link their businesses together for longer term mutual benefit. This can only be achieved as a result of a high level of trust and interdependence. So an example for the formation of a new company was when GlaxoSmithKline and Alphabet joined together to establish a bioelectronics company, or the formation of the brands such as Sony Ericsson. The appropriate alignment of relationships through the supply chain is essential to ensure competitive advantage. In practice, organisations may adopt a competitive approach with some suppliers and a collaborative approach with others. And tools that help us determine the most appropriate relationship would be your supplier positioning model, which helps to understand the risks and issues of products, the supplier preferencing model to analyse market behaviours, and market management matrix, which enables the buying organisation to understand the dynamics between the supplier positioning model and the preferencing model in order to select the most appropriate relationship. So here you can see the Kraljic model. To improve supply chain, procurement must also undertake an account upstream risk and supply network associated with the suppliers in their supply stream. So this Kraljic analysis has been used for many years to establish these risks and formulate strategies to counter them. This happened in 1983 when Peter Kraljic devised the means of segmenting its supply base. And he argued that supply items should be mapped against two dimensions: risk and profitability. Risk relates to the likelihood of an unexpected event in the supply chain that would disrupt their operations. The supplier suffers from a range of risks depending on its geographic location, business model, and supply chain length. All such risks have a bearing upon the buying organisation. Profitability describes the impact of a supply chain upon its bottom line. So for certain areas of spend like stationery, they only have a negligible effect on profits. In other categories, a single source of supply can make or break a business. So it aims to remove supply vulnerability as much as possible and maximise potential for buying power. This Kraljic matrix helps to determine on a product or category basis the type of relationship we should be fostering with each of our suppliers. So it works by mapping the profit impact of a product on one axis and the upstream risk on the other. The supplier preferencing model is very similar to Kraljic, but it's looking at how the supplier views us. And it's based on two measurements, that is revenue value of account and the amount of a supplier's company that the client currently represents. The value of a supplier's company that the client could signify is the attractiveness of the account, the productivity of selling to the customers, the purchasing power of the buyer, the convenience of handling customer accounts, and prospective customers in the use of excellent service that grow the prospective use of that client. The business fit, payment on time, reliability, all affect the value of a business to the account. So this model focuses on the value of business to the supplier, and it's reflective in the proportion of the supplier's turnover. And it also looks at the level of attractiveness of the business to a supplier. So it reflects an overall effect of several other factors that will influence supplier motivations. Where this is the supplier's key industry or sector, the payment record for the supplier and ease of doing business with them is what they'll base their strategy on. But as I explained earlier, this marketing management mix looks at both of those things together and maps it into a matrix. So it can be constructed to determine whether both the buyer and supplier are on the same level or on the same terms in their perception of their relationship. Clearly, the best relationship here is when you see them as core, they see you as, or you see them as critical, they see you as core. This is where you can form a strategic alliance. If you see each other as differently, like you're seeing them as a core, or they see you as core, but you see them as non-critical, then clearly the buyer has all the power. So it incorporates both the Kraljic and the supplier preferencing matrix. Some of these relationships are clearly not compatible. So the parties won't enter into these relationships unless the market dictates it, like a monopoly. Now, in addition to the list on the screen, we've identified there's a range of underlying factors driving outsourcing, which includes the deterioration of quality and performance of existing quality, delivery failure and poor service, large price increases, substantial volume changes or pressure to reduce the cost, wishing to concentrate their internal resources on areas of special competence, or the need for secrecy, import substitution, or this overall reliance on third parties, desire to change the terms of engagement. Outsourcing is not just a public sector phenomenon. It can also be seen in the private sector and the public sector. So this matrix helps you to clearly see the tasks, processes and functions that you should keep in-house and which you should safely outsource. So the two at the top show the two most strategic important um, services that your business might be looking at or goods that your service might be looking at. Now, if they're at the top, they are strategically important, but there's a question mark about who can do things better and cheaper. In the top right-hand corner, this is something that you as a business can do better and cheaper, so you keep it in-house. This is the retain box. If you think the third-party supplier can do it better and cheaper than you, it can go in the outsource box on the bottom right-hand corner. But actually, if you find that something is quite important to you, maybe you're good at it, they're cheaper at it, or maybe they're cheaper at it and you're good at it, it would be better to do a strategic alliance, which is the top left-hand side. But if you do find situations where it doesn't really add value, it's not important to you, then potentially you could eliminate these tasks altogether. But outsourcing is common practice for contracting out business functions and processes to third parties. The benefits can be substantial, from cost savings and efficiencies to a greater competitive advantage. But on the other hand, loss of control over outsourced function is often a potential business risk. You should consider carefully the pros and cons of outsourcing before deciding to contract out any activities or business operation. So here's a few of the advantages. It does support rationalization and downsizes. It allows us to focus everything on the managerial staff and everything that's core in terms of your business competencies. What does the what does the customer value in their eyes? And it addresses and leverages the specialist expertise, technology and resource of contractors. Assesses economies of scale. It adds a competitive performance initiative, leveraging collaborative relationships, i.e. 2 + 2 = 5, and cost certainty for activity where demands and costs are uncertain or fluctuating. And then we've got globalisation, which is the process by which the world is becoming increasingly interconnected. And that's as a result of massively increased trade and cultural exchange. Globalisation has increased the production of goods and services. The biggest companies are no longer national firms, but multinational corporations with subsidiaries in many countries. And it can be driven by the desire to increase profits, become competitive in other markets, or strengthen the market position by having a presence closer to the market, or to market products in new markets to increase life cycle, or source operations at a low cost from low-cost countries. So the drivers would be increased profits, expanding your markets, strengthen your market position, extending your product life cycles, reducing your cost, and reducing service costs as well. Now, offshoring involves the relocation of a business activity from its home country to a different international location. It's the changed international location of where the business activity is performed that is key to understanding offshoring. It's traditionally been associated with the relocation of manufacturing activities from domestic economies, i.e. US to China or UK to Poland. Offshoring is increasingly common with business services, so UK financial services using call centres that are based in India. However, the use of offshoring has slowed down in recent years, especially in IT. So a company may decide to change the international location of where its business activities are undertaken, and that's for a number of reasons. To access lower manufacturing costs, to access potentially better skilled or higher quality supply, to make use of its existing capacity overseas, to take advantage of free trade areas and avoid protectionism, and to make it easier to target international markets. And then global sourcing refers to seeking goods and services beyond one's borders. So from the global market, it's a procurement strategy in which companies try to find the most cost-effective place globally for manufacturing goods. And it's the process of sourcing goods and services from international markets across a geopolitical boundary. It aims to exploit global inefficiencies, and it accesses things like lower cost skilled labour and cheaper raw materials and other economic factors like tax breaks and lower trade tariffs. Some of the advantages of global sourcing are learning how to do business successfully in a new market, finding and developing alternate suppliers and sources to reduce costs and stimulate competition. The opportunity exists to locate scarce skills and resources that are not available or unproductive at home, thereby increasing manufacturing capacity and other technical capabilities. But there are also disadvantages. Monitoring costs go up, and there are hidden costs relating to the effort and time spent learning about different cultures and time zones, especially in the beginning. And there is exposure to financial, political, legal risks, often in emerging economies. And finally, this low cost country sourcing is the accelerated trend towards increasing your sourcing outside markets, fueled mainly by the relentless competitive pressure that are driving companies to diverse ways to continually reduce cost. So increased globalization has brought with it a few trade restrictions and tariffs, lowering the costs and inheriting the risks of doing business with low-cost countries even more. Improvements in technological infrastructure throughout the worldwide proliferation of internet access has significantly improved the communication speed with reduction of associated costs. These twin forces of global competitiveness and increased accessibility have made low-cost country sourcing a key part of companies' procurement strategies. Any organisation thinking of low-cost country sourcing must have access to local understanding and knowledge of how the supply chain operates. So the advantages will be labour, raw materials, infrastructure, quality, production and supporting development with government incentives. But the downside is the location, exchange rates, law and regulations, intellectual property, reliability, logistics and communications. And that's the end of Learning Outcome 1. Thank you for watching.